Hey everyone, time to check in on the technical analysis and chart setups for the cannabis and psychedelic space. I have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. But we've seen a decent bounce here in the short term. But we're starting with the psychedelic sector first here because we're seeing a lot more upside. And if we're viewing both sectors as a group, very clearly the lead bulls are psychedelic names. And I know there's a bunch of little penny stocks in this sector, but I'm focused on the higher listed names that have significant dollar volume. And really, I just use CMPS, ATAI, and MNMD as my gauge of the sector. And we got a Netflix documentary coming out in a week called How to Change Your Mind, something along those lines. And I don't think that's going to be a catalyst for these stocks specifically, but again, just a little step forward towards the shift in societal norms, or just a shift. And we're looking for the profitable shifts with trading to come at the legislative level. But it starts with, of course, the general population, as we saw with cannabis and that whole movement over the last decade plus. So you look at a name like CMPS, we see the dollar volume on average is still only about 5 million or so, but that's enough for me to have interest. And look at this move. We're up 100% off the lows. So is the bottom in? I certainly think so. And that is because we would need to see over a 50% drop to hit fresh lower lows. If the broader stock market starts to fall apart again and see another significant leg down and drop 10% plus and a whole new wave of fear, then yes, absolutely, we can head back to where we came from. But again, the fact that we hit 100% move here is very notable to me. And one thing you'll also notice is you don't have the kind of social media following and interest of this sector and of these names that you do with cannabis. So this is not from retail, in my opinion, in terms of why we're going up right now. And a lot of it has to do, for example, ATAI is being bought by one of Cathie Wood's ARC ETFs. So I think it was Thursday, there was a filing that showed they had purchased over 100,000 shares that day. And so that is having an impact, especially when your average daily volume is only 700,000. If you're buying 100,000 in a day, that certainly makes the price move up. So at this point in time, this is a daily uptrend. And for you cannabis bulls who don't remember, this is what strength and confidence looks like. This is what higher lows and higher highs look like, and follow through and increasing bull volume. And that is what you have to see to have confidence. And this is a notable move. So as far as resistance, we're looking at 1383, 1451, and 1531. Anybody that has shorted this name in the last over 2 months is underwater. From the weekly perspective, do we have a weekly uptrend? I would say we have not clearly pivoted to a higher low and higher high. Some people might look at this and say, well, there's a little higher low into continuation. But for me, I need a more clear pivot. But again, this chart is doing everything that the bulls want to see. It bottomed before the broader market did. Our low was May 12th, and we look at the S&P 500, this was May 12th. And so while the broader market is dropping to lower lows, CMPS is going to higher highs. That's relative strength. And relative strength is essential for a bottom to be put in. And again, one way to visualize relative strength, CMPS divided by SPY, we can see has been in a significant uptrend as well. So we're watching for relative strength. But again, if you want the poster child of what a long-term prolonged downtrend, look at the monthly time frame before this bounce started. And the last 7 months were just as ugly as any cannabis name over the last 7 months. And really, in that 7 months, forget the all-time high, but in that 7-month span, we dropped 87%. But here we are seeing the monthly stair-step drop with a lower high every single month, breaking into a 100% bounce. So that is notable. And again, if you're only interested in cannabis, look at this chart as a guide and say, okay, these are all the things that I want to see as far as a long-term downtrend, finding a bottom and shifting momentum. What are the fundamental catalysts here? I'm sure there's a couple things going on, but certainly nothing, that's getting anybody's attention from outside this sector. We're not seeing any posts on Reddit in terms of the hype crowd coming in here, and we're not seeing them talking about it on CNBC, and we're not seeing Twitter light up with psychedelic sector euphoria. So it's a very quiet 100% move. ATAI, is also seeing this notable trend change. Base of support, higher low, and established a wall at 350 with a triple bottom into continuation. 446 is resistance. If we get over that level, it's the highest level in over 2 months. So 446 and 480 are the next levels. Weekly is still not in an uptrend. If we were to reject from 446, we'd be watching for the potential of an inverse head and shoulders, but we're not going to worry about that until we top out, and we're not going to top out as long as we have a daily uptrend. So both of these names, because of the significant move this past week, and again, we've been watching, check out our daily videos in the broader stock market, because we've been noting the strength in growth names. Growth names have been leading the move off the bottom. The biotech sector, extremely notable, the solar sector, and cannabis, of course, is the weakest of the weak of the weak. Growth names as a group were all leading the way down. They topped out long before the broader market. And those growth names, many of them, most of them are finding some bottoms into some solid 20 to 50% bounces. Cannabis is just not participating, and it's staying the weakest of the weak. But psychedelic is not the weakest of the weak with these moves. So we can be watching for daily higher lows to be the result of next consolidation. CMPS can pull back 10% and just be looking for a daily higher low. So I'll be watching for hourly oversold conditions on the next daily pullback. I'll be watching daily EMA 12 support. But this is the most bullish week for a name like CMPS in a long time because of that volume and the size of the move, of course. 20% plus last week. MNMD is much weaker coming off the lows. Daily resistance of 73 cents is a double top. So watching for the potential of an inverse head and shoulders here. Essentially, MNMD is trying to be the laggard of the sector. And if we change the daily trend, we're then going to watch for anything under 105 to be a weekly lower high. So a lot more work to do for these bulls to play catch up. Obviously, it looks a lot different. We're in a daily downtrend still, while CMPS has been in a daily uptrend for weeks. So that is your poster child for ideal shift, showing a very long-term, prolonged, brutal downtrend and shifting to the bulls. And again, there was, when the bottom was hit here, there was no massive volume. You couldn't look, if you're looking at the price action, you say, okay, that's a nice bounce, but it's all about the trend change, which we got. But at this point in time, there's nothing saying the bottom's in. There's definitely a lot of volume near that low, but earnings was a factor with that. So we're just keeping that in mind. Again, there was no fundamental catalyst to mark this bottom, and there was no glaring, massive bull volume day. It was just a slow grind, a shift where the scales of supply outweigh demand for a long time. And then those scales did this, they leveled out pretty much here. This is the scales leveling out. And then they flipped to demand then outweighing supply for that move. Here's IWM. IWM, we have a lot of correlation with the broader market. And I should say the growth names, which is how I view IWM, and cannabis names. And just as an example, you look at the last month of trading here, low, higher the bounce, higher low, and now testing resistance. And you look at Cron, it's the same thing, except on Friday we broke resistance. So a little bit of relative strength. Granted, there's a big upper wick, but you can see how similar these charts are. And TLRY, very similar as well, just a little bit weaker under that resistance. So still using the broader market as a guide. But again, I'm always watching who's relatively stronger than the broader market and who is relatively weaker. So just looking at IWM, I can say Cron is slightly stronger and TLRY is slightly weaker. Close at the low of the day for TLRY. And again, I can see that just from pulling up the charts, but if you want some help with that visual, IWM divided by Cron shows you, well, let's do Cron divided by IWM. Shows you a little bit of relative strength with that daily bull move. And then TLRY divided by IWM shows you that relatively weaker. So unable to break resistance. So if I'm ranking the Canadian cannabis names, we've seen a big shuffle here over the last year plus in terms of who stands out as a lead bull and a lead bear. And Cron is a lead bull right now. Cron technically just confirmed a daily uptrend. Granted, there's no follow through at this point, but that is a daily higher low and higher high. Next time we pull back on the daily, anything above 274 is a daily higher low. And we're certainly not going to anticipate any follow through if IWM and if SPY and if QQQ, which are all testing a key daily resistance to start next week, if they reject, we're going to look for daily consolidation in the sector. So it's a pretty pivotal pivotal short-term moment in the broader stock market as to whether or not we're going to remain range-bound to start this coming week or confirm the trend change for follow-through. 361 is a major resistance level. Again, when you change the daily trend, you zoom out to the weekly, because we've been seeing weekly lower highs on our last bounces for the last 4 months. So anything under 361 is just a weekly lower high. When's the last time we've seen a clear weekly higher low and higher high? And the answer is it has not happened since we topped out February of 2021. So it has not happened in a year and a half, which tells us it'll be very notable when that does happen. But at this point, daily uptrend, trying to maintain the daily higher lows as long as possible, and all about 361 weekly lower high resistance. VFF is probably the next strongest name in the sector. Strong close at the high of Friday. 306 has to break though, if we're going to see a trend change. And then if 306 breaks, we zoom out to the weekly, and there's tons of space for a weekly lower high. I personally would be considering, really anything under 655. That's the last clear weekly bounce. This was a very weak weekly bounce here. So I'm just going to be watching if we confirm the daily uptrend, knowing that a weekly lower high will be the result of this bounce. Just a question of how much bounce follow through can we see. So can VFF break 306 and try and join cron bulls? We've got 318 is the next level behind it. As far as from there, TLRY is probably the middle of the road. So I'm viewing this as a low, high, and we double bottomed at $3 essentially. But if we don't break 372, it's just another daily lower high, keeping that daily downtrend intact. We've been setting daily lower highs ever since we topped out at the end of March. So bulls have a lot of proving to do here. And again, these are nice bounces, $3 to 359. That's a 20% bounce. And I'll talk about my trading style, which many of you already know, but I like to play oversold bounces, but I scale out again because I'm playing counter trend. And I'll talk about that and how I've managed my MSOS most recent trade. Essentially trying to position in risk-free positions where I'll stop out if the downtrends continue, and I'll have a position if a bottom is found. Because again, I'm looking at that CMPS and I'm saying there would have been nothing in the first month of this bounce taking shape that would have had me say, that's the bottom. We're about to bounce 100%. So it can happen quickly and quietly. It's more exciting when it happens fast and hard and there's social media excitement and fundamental catalysts, but it doesn't have to happen that way. As far as our weaker names in Canadian MJ, it's clearly ACB and CGC. And CGC is falling to the wayside as far as joining ACB. And ACB, it was dilution, and CGC as well. And again, I put out that YouTube video, which you have not, if you have not seen it yet, Google, YouTube, ChartGuys, dilution. Let's see if that brings it up. So yeah, watch that video. And it's a perfect example of ACB and CGC's daily charts comparative to peers over the last month. And the reason is dilution news. So ACB, dilution, just absolutely derailed the bulls. And CGC just had the same thing happen. So anything under 161 is a daily lower high. And I'm just viewing this as a low, high. We did form a higher low at 126. But anything under 161 is just a lower high, remaining within this tightening range. Excuse me. CGC, dilution news, again, just gap down and slow bleed out. It'll put in a bottom, but then we're just going to bounce and look for a daily lower high, anything under 386. And what this dilution news has done has very significantly strengthened the bearish correlation, where it doesn't matter what the broader market's doing, it doesn't matter what the sector's been doing, we're still grinding down with a lower high every single day. Bulls are hoping that's a volume climax from Friday, but got to break the lower high everyday pattern, and then we just zoom out and scout a daily lower high to be the result of that bounce. So on to USMJ names, IIPR. And we can see that IIPR is doing the same thing that TLRY is doing the same thing that IWM is doing. So again, very similar. Anything under 121 is just a daily lower high. So low, high, double bottom. If we can't break 121, we're not going anywhere. Big old drop down here. and burn on bulls to confirm a daily trend change, but pretty much doing the same thing as IWM. And if we look at IIPR divided by IWM, we can see sideways. I mean, if your correlation chart that you're looking at is sideways, it's telling you it's just doing the exact same thing as what you're measuring against. So IIPR has been pretty much doing what IWM has been doing the last 7 days, 8 days, just no real difference. And again, if this chart breaks bull, we're seeing a lot of relative strength in IIPR, and if it breaks bear, we're seeing a lot of relative weakness. So that's how I use these correlation charts to visualize that relative strength and weakness. On to the MSOs. So MSOS, before we get to the individual names, we'll talk about this a bit. We're in a daily downtrend, right? So nothing has changed. We are seeing periods of bounces because what you get is a point where nobody's left to short in the short term, nobody's left to sell their long holdings, and so you get shorts covering and you get some bulls buying a dip and you get a bounce. So again, it's just the scales between demand, the supply far outweighing demand of shares, and then you see, I mean, again, this drop here, this 3-day drop, the whole drop. Supply is outweighing demand notably. And shorts adding supply, whatever it is, supply is outweighing demand. Then we have this inside bar day. So this is the scales. We're leveling out. Supply and demand is evening. And then after the double bottom at the all-time low of 1008, the scales tilted to demand outweighing supply. Some of that demand is shorts covering. But that's the easiest way to visualize trends. And so once that double bottom hit, and again, I've been talking about this trade a decent bit in the daily videos that I did this past week and on Twitter as well. But I saw the double bottom at 10:08, and I saw relative strength in growth names on Monday or Tuesday because of the holiday. And so that, for me, was enough to get aggressive and say, okay, I see strength in growth names. I'm watching for a bounce in all growth sectors. I've been playing the bounce in the biotech sector, and so I was looking for the MSOs to act as a laggard to the growth bounce, which they did. So I was in at 1055 with a position that is swing sized, which is less than a day trade size position for me because there's more variables of how things can shape up, and I usually give a longer leash and let the trade play out further. But from there, I've been micromanaging a little bit. I sold half at 1122 after a little double top in the 1140s one day, rebought it at 1104. So just knocking a little bit off of my break even. And then I sold 30% at 1130s on Thursday. So I'm down to a 70% from my entry at 1055. My break even is something around 1020. And I'm going to let that play out for the daily trend change attempt. I know we're going to have to consolidate on the daily here, and I have to sit through that. I don't have to, but I don't want to be micromanaging this trade on a daily basis. Essentially, I'm positioning myself in a no-risk position. Ideally, I want to get my risk under $10 to be break even, but I'm trying to let it play out for the possibility that maybe the broader market bulls put in a longer-term bottom and we confirm a daily trend change. And next thing you know, we're up 30, 50%. So again, I'm looking at CMPS as a model, and nice big old bounce. We gave a lot of that bounce back, but that has to happen for the daily trend change to take place. So I could view it two ways. I could just lock in my gains and say, you know, that's that, and keep an eye on things. But I do want to have a possible smaller position for the potential of a daily trend change. And of course, if we just drop to lower lows, I'm all out. And because I sold partial into strength, I'm either going to stop out break even or with a tiny insignificant loss. So that's how I'm approaching things. And I've been approaching it that way for months where, you know, I have zero interest in the sector and then I play a little bit of a bounce and I'll stop out break even. I'll stop out with a small loss. Haven't made gains in this sector in a while, which is why I'm reliant on other sectors. Crypto in 2021 was great. Biotech sector in both directions in 2022 has been great. But so I'm not relying on this to be my bread and butter, but I'm just keeping an eye on it. I'm not going to fall asleep on this sector. And as I mentioned many times, I'm interested in looking for trying to establish a position heading into what I feel will be, depending on the broader market, of course, but a bull move into voting season in November, which again is still a long ways away, many months, but that is on my horizon. That's my dangling carrot. So that's how I'm going to play the sector. And if I stop out, I'll be right back to patiently watching, and I'll look to do it all over again eventually at another spot. The monthly time frame here, we see obviously the massive drop, but look at the biotech sector. Look at NIO. So NIO saw the monthly bounce get started first, and that's been growth. Look at the biotech sector. Again, we've been dropping just as long, maybe not as significantly. The biotech sector was down 65% over a span of, how many candles is that? So down 65% over 15 months. Inside bar bull break, the scales tilted between supply and demand. We double bottomed, and then bulls took off. And at this point, we're up 36%, which is very significant for an entire sector. It doesn't look like it, right? It looks like that's just a little dinky bounce, but 65% drop, and we've already made back more than half of that drop on this bounce. My point is, MSOS is going to have a monthly bounce at some point. I'm not calling any bottoms. I have no idea if the bottom is set. I positioned myself for the possibility that it's set in a low risk, high reward scenario. But anyways, the pullback here, 82% compared to 65%, and number of months, 16. So very similar, but certainly not anywhere near the confidence in the bounce at the moment. So anyways, that's how I play the sector. I'm not just scaling in. I don't care about the fundamentals or the valuations or anything to do with that. Just like they get way extended to the upside, they get way extended to the downside. One thing is missing, volume. Where's the bull volume? It is not there. It was there for one day, great. But declining from there, not going to cut it. I need volume to have confidence in a bottom. Granted, CMPS, it did have the high volume around its earnings, but it didn't have a huge volume day that stood out. But I look at something like MARA, this is crypto miners. Look at that volume. That's a mini short squeeze. Again, down forever, prolonged downtrend for a year almost, 10 months. Massive drop, despair, hopelessness, and the volume in a mini short squeeze. This is very convincing. I would have a lot more confidence calling a temporary bottom in the sector if we saw something like that. But we're not. So again, I'm not biased here, and I'm not saying, oh, the bottom's in because I've got a position. I'm saying I've got a position. I'm not confident in any way, shape, or form that the bottom is in, and I need to see volume. I'm skeptical of bulls because it's the burden on bulls that have to prove to me that the bottom is in, and they're just not doing that at this point. So individual names, there have been periods where some names clearly stand out stronger and some names weaker. At this point, everybody's just weak. So again, nice bounce on GTBIF. But when we top out, we have to confirm the daily uptrend. When's the last time we've seen a daily higher low and higher high? Back here at the end of March. So April, May, June, over 3 months, we have not seen that happen. And it still hasn't happened. It has to happen for anything to change. Declining bull volume. TCNNF already clearly topping out. We would have to hold 1095 and break 1320 for anything to change. If we do not break 1320, nothing changes. Look at the daily lower highs, just constant. CRLBF, slow grind down forever, decent little bounce, daily trend change needed, hasn't happened in months. Many months. Last daily higher low and higher high here, February. CURLF, sideways. So building a base of support, but not doing anything to go on offense. Have to get over 543 for a short-term bull break. MBRNOF, decent bounce, but anything under 717, just a daily lower high. Daily trend change needed. Even here, there's no daily trend change. Nice big move. Everybody was getting excited. Gave it all back. No trend change happened. So that's where we stand. Bulls have a ton of proving to do. And essentially, I'm not focused on the sector in any way. But I'm keeping one eye on it. I'm focused in other places where there's more volatility and volume and opportunity and liquidity. But we will see these sectors bounce 100% at some point, and I want to take advantage of that. Not constantly trying, not banging my head against the wall, not bag holding, but positioning myself for solid reward, low risk. All right. Feel free to share your game plan. And we will check back in. Need volume. Volume's got to show up. Volume's got to show up to show us interest and show us some pressure on shorts. Have a good rest of your weekend.